Hey there, kings and queens. Welcome back to another episode of Faith Helps Podcast, and I am your host, Diamond Booth. And I hope that you guys are hanging in there as we are coming down, concluding our week and also wrapping up this month. Can you guys believe March is almost over, like already? That's crazy. I don't know about you all, but I feel like the month just breezed by so quickly. But nevertheless, we must continue to press on. And I hope that you guys got a chance to tune into last week's episode. It was so phenomenal getting an opportunity to talk to Coach Kat and hearing about her story, her vulnerability and transparency that she gifted to us as she shared about some of the things that she overcame throughout her life and has been able to turn into something productive and something that has contributed to her overall healing internally and externally. If you didn't get a chance to check out that podcast, I really advise that you go back and listen to it, pick up some of those gems, and also appreciate her authenticity. And with that being said, picking up for today, I wanted to kind of come back to some questions that I actually received from the last episodes. And they kind of centered around this theme of one of the recommendations I gave to our journey on healing, which is therapy. And a few of the questions were more so related specifically to these last couple of episodes and content that was mentioned about healing in those episodes. So I wanted to just dedicate this episode to just a Q&A, some of the questions that you guys have shared, some of the comments and thoughts, and then just speaking to that. And hopefully we can all just have some clarity and more direction in how do we continue to grow strongly and grow through what we go through. Okay, so number one, I got a really amazing question that I loved, and I probably will spend the bulk of this episode talking about this. And I want to start here with, how do you know when it's time to start your healing journey? That question had a second part, and the second part was, in other words, how do I know when I'm ready for therapy? And I really like that question, and I also appreciate the questions that you guys send me or ask. I really, really appreciate it. It's helpful so that I actually know what's going to be beneficial and fruitful in your lives to talk about. Not just wanting to get on the mic just to talk. I actually want this to be helpful to you. So, to break that down, I believe it was our first episode on healing love, where we talked about knowing when it's time to start healing. And one of the things I pointed out is obvious. It's not always obvious, but being mindful of how are you functioning. A lot of times, the way our functioning is impacted is an indicator of what needs to heal. And what I mean by that, giving you an example here. If you are constantly noticing a pattern where you get close to people and then you cut them off because you feel like they're too close, or the intimacy feels too uncomfortable or vulnerable, that's likely a red flag or indication that there's something relating to a more deeper issue, not just that surface issue of commitment or intimacy, that needs to be addressed. And sometimes people are struck by that because they feel as though just because something happened years ago, it shouldn't still be bothering you. That is not the case. Okay? That's really important to understand. There are times when there can be something that happened to you decades ago and it's still impacting you today. And it may be something that seems small. It may be something that seems as though it shouldn't be as big of an issue. It can still impact you today. And part of deciphering between what that is and how to go about it is therapy, which leads into that second part of the question. How do you know you're ready for therapy? Number one, I love that question because I do feel like sometimes with the wave of the shifts in our culture where there's this fixation almost on mental health and therapy and just like focusing on therapy. Yes, I absolutely support going to therapy, and I think it's important to know when you're actually ready to do therapy. Therapy is not a space for you to just have a friend to talk to. That's absolutely not what therapy is for. Therapy is also not a space for you to just dump everything and then not want to process it or work through it or do something about it. That is not what therapy is for. And if you're noticing that you're running into the pattern of it feels better to go to therapy and just drop things, like just unload all the stuff that you're going through, and then you're resisting or noticing yourself resist wanting to actually talk it through, you're not going deep enough into therapy to resolve the actual problem. It also robs you of the opportunity to learn how to be more independent and autonomous and how you're managing your symptoms, your triggers, and what's coming up for you. If you never realize or learn or dive more into how to address those in a healthy and productive way, you'll continue repeating that same cycle. That's why it's so important to take a step back and really ask yourself, number one, when you're thinking about whether or not you're ready for therapy. Number one, am I ready to be honest with myself? It's a hard thing to do, to be honest with yourself, being honest about what hurt you, being honest about what you've gone through, as well as being honest about some of the things that don't feel comfortable and are hard to admit. Of course, the therapist can coach you through that. However, you have to be willing to do it. Therapy is not a space for you to come and the therapist is going to force you to do anything. That's not good therapy. Because if your ability to choose is taken, then you're not actually making those core changes that need to happen in order for you to have long-lasting changes. Sure, we can think about short-term solutions and short-term ways of coping and short-term ways of processing things. However, there is no depth in that, meaning that the problem, the core, the roots of the issue is bound to come back up. And if you do not learn now how to deal with it in a deeper level, you're going to continue to repeat that. What does that look like? It looks like, if you have, going on with the same example we had, if you have an issue with constantly getting close to people and then running away from that commitment or that intimacy, and then in therapy, you guys start to dig a little bit more into that and uncover that there is some emotional trauma or some pain or resentment that you've been harboring related to a very early relationship, and you check out and say, well, I don't want to talk about that. Okay, maybe you're not ready to talk about it at that time. That's okay. You may need some time. However, if your mindset is that you never want to talk about it and are never going to be open to talking about it, that issue that you're experiencing in the relationships you're having today is going to continue to happen until you resolve that issue. Or what happens for some people is they meet an enabler. In other words, they meet someone who allows them to continue to function in dysfunction. And that's how we end up with these parasitic or toxic or unhealthy or unevenly yoked relationships and marriages or even friendships. And nobody needs that. That's not living your better or best self. That's not you living to your full potential. That's not you enjoying all of the fruits of what is available to you when you do the work. Therapy is about doing the work of therapy. It's work. Literally, there are times with some therapists, they may give you homework. They may have you work on something independently or continue processing something that came up in session out of session. They may give you recommendations or actual handouts. This is all because we want you to learn how to build up healthier habits, but also how to do the processing for yourself as well. Any therapist that is not teaching you how to be able to implement these same things for yourself is not a good therapist. It's not. If you're not growing and you're not making next steps on how you can work towards a healthier lifestyle, that's not good. And that's not benefiting you in the long run. That's enabling you, and it's crippling. Now, there are some people who benefit from having a therapist that they do check-ins with. That's slightly different from having a therapist that you're doing weekly individual or bi-weekly individual counseling with. Sure, it's okay to check in with someone and have someone that you can consult with as you're processing things, or as you're noticing new things coming up and you're like, oh wait, I just had this recent death in my life and now I'm noticing that XYZ is coming up. Great. It's good to have that in place already. But when you are making the decision to initially start therapy, that first question is asking yourself if you are ready to be honest with yourself. The second question is taking a moment to consider whether or not you can truly commit and are in a place where you're able to commit to therapy. That means being consistent. That's something that was brought up in the episode with Coach Kat. Consistency is so important. Think about it like the gym. If you go to the gym once a month, or you go to the gym once a year and you're not consistent with it, then you're not going to see the progress that you want. Especially if you then supplement that with a bunch of unhealthy eating and all this unhealthy patterns of maintaining yourself. That's not good, right? So with that, apply that same mentality to therapy. If you're trying therapy and you say, okay, I'm ready to start, working through some of the things that I need to heal through, I'm going to go ahead and start therapy. And you have one session and it feels uncomfortable because you don't like having to talk about your emotions. It's new. It feels weird. And then you decide, I'm not going to go back to therapy until a couple of months. Well, you literally are continuously changing the starting line every time you do that. Because there is a level of catching back up, rebuilding rapport, because rapport is important between you and the therapist when you are doing therapy. And so every time you extend it, okay, I'm gonna wait, and now I'm gonna try it again, you're constantly moving the starting line of how to start building up that rapport, as well as building up a foundation to work from. And so many other things end up happening in your life that when you do go back for that next session, you spend that time talking about all that recent surface level stuff that happened instead of getting to the core of things. So consistency is important. Another reason why consistency is important when it comes to therapy is because if you are constantly taking moments to break away from therapy and then re-engage, or you're constantly switching therapist after therapist after therapist after therapist, then you are constantly robbing yourself of the opportunity of sitting with the discomfort. And I would say that's the third question to ask yourself. Are you ready to sit with the discomfort? Are you ready to be comfortable with being uncomfortable? Because therapy is gonna get uncomfortable. There are going to be times where you don't like it. There are going to be times where you may be mad with your therapist. There are times where you may feel very vulnerable and scared, or very small. There are also going to be times where you feel angry and enraged and pissed off, to be quite frank. And that is okay. When you're digging up very painful memories, when you are digging up trauma and abuse and abandonment, and when you are digging up some of those core ideas you have about yourself and your insecurities, there are times where it's going to be extremely uncomfortable. Coming back to the gym analogy, it's the same thing. When you're trying to gain muscle, that process of lifting the heavier weight feels so uncomfortable. It can feel painful. It can feel irritating. But you get back up, you go back to the gym, and you do it again because you want to see the goals be accomplished. You want to be able to succeed. You want to be able to step into that version of yourself that you would like to be and that God called you to be. That's not going to happen if you keep jumping ship when it gets uncomfortable. How do you get comfortable with being uncomfortable? The only way you do that is by sitting in it, my friend. There is no other solution. There's no shortcut. There's no bypass. The only way you get over being and feeling uncomfortable is to sit in it. That means when you are in therapy and let's say, for example, you're talking about feelings of abandonment and you don't like that rush that you feel in your spine of stress or tension, or you're noticing your heart is starting to race, or your palms are starting to feel hot and sweaty, or you're noticing that there's a pain and pressure in your stomach or on your chest, it means staying with it and saying what you're feeling. Oftentimes in therapy, I encourage my clients to check back in with what are you feeling in your body. Your body gives signals of the emotions that you're experiencing. So when you pay attention to, okay, what am I feeling physiologically? Then you can help narrow down, okay, what is the emotion behind it? If emotions are hard for you to narrow down or identify. With that, as you're starting to get accustomed to noticing those feelings, part of sitting down with it is reminding yourself of your why. Why did you decide to start therapy? Why did you want to do therapy? Why did you want to make these goals? Why did you make the goals in the first place? Think about your why, your reason for doing this, and that can help you, motivate you, empower you, and encourage you. And your therapist can do that as well, but it requires communication. Those are the questions I would encourage you to ask yourself if you're trying to decide if you, one, are ready to start working towards your healing, and if you're ready for therapy. Another question that came in that I also like, and this was stemming more from, I believe it was episode 7, about my comment on knowing how to decipher what is therapy and what is just venting. And I think that was a really good question. And to that, I would say, if you are going into therapy, the difference between venting versus actually doing the work of therapy is if you go into the session and all you do is say everything that happened, but then you're not processing the thoughts, the emotions, and the behaviors that accompanied whatever happened in your life or what came up for you, and there's no exchange of like feedback or encouragement to reflect on whatever event happened in your life and how it's shaping you today and how it's impacting your current functioning, that doing those things, that's therapy. Not doing those things and you're just dumping it and you're not processing or identifying how it relates to your here and now, that's just venting. You know that you're just venting when you can say, yep, I could easily go do this with a friend. That's what we do with friends. We vent. And sometimes, depending on the type of friends you have, you may have friends who give you feedback, offer their observations. For example, with my friends, because majority of them are therapists, when I'm sharing something that happened in my life that really frustrated me, they listen. And if they left it at just that, and I'm like, yeah, that sucks, they just allowed me to vent, right? Processing it, such as what you do in therapy, would be, okay, the classic question that people hate, how did that make you feel? But going even deeper of, what did that situation remind you of? And then I'm able to say, oh, yeah, my mom used to do that exact same thing and I hated it. Or my uncle used to do or say this exact same thing and it reminds me of that and I didn't like that, or that hurt me. That is what processing in therapy looks like. Being able to connect the dots and being able to separate the past from the present in a healthy way, as opposed to just trying to avoid it. And also being able to name the things, naming what you're feeling, naming what you're seeing, naming what you're experiencing. So that's the difference that I would offer between venting versus actual therapy. I would also say that sometimes venting can feel good, but a lot of times it leaves you with no solution for the problem. In therapy, you're actually identifying next steps and ways to move forward in a productive and healthy way that is in alignment with your values and who you want to be and what you want to accomplish. Third question that I got, I'm not sure what episode this was in reference to, was how do I overcome hurt from a therapist to try again? And I wasn't able to get, if you're listening, I reached out to you in your DMs to get clarity on what you meant by that, and I didn't get a response yet. So I'm just going to answer that question based off of what I'm thinking you're asking. So how do you overcome hurt from a therapist to try again? And I'm thinking that's in therapy. So for example, if you get hurt by a therapist in therapy, because that does happen, there are therapists and clinicians out here that are just not great and they do crappy things. And for some people, that's an understatement. I just want to validate and recognize and acknowledge that that does happen. Here's what I would say to that. Overcoming the hurt is, one, taking a step back and thinking, okay, that happened. And I still have needs that I want to get met, and I still have things that I want to work through, and I still deserve it. Try again and be willing to advocate for what you want. And also, when you meet with a new therapist or you try a new therapist, I would tell them first and foremost, okay, look, I'm kind of already 1 foot out of the door right now because I had therapy before and this is what happened. XYZ happened, and that left a very hurtful or painful, depiction in my mind of what therapy looks like. Give that therapist the opportunity to know, okay, this is what you're coming in with, this is what to be mindful of, and this is how we can, heal and work through that in a collaborative way. The other thing that I would offer you to consider is think about this. When you go to a food restaurant, and if you get food poisoning and you get really sick, you don't stop going to all restaurants, right? You just stop going to that one. The same thing applies to a therapist. If you have a bad experience with a therapist, you don't keep going back to that same therapist. You go to a different therapist. And I would encourage you, part of advocating for yourself and what you feel like you need is being able to be flexible in how you get those services met, whether it's through virtual counseling, or if you actually decide to do a Google search and find an in-person counselor. There are so many options on Psychology Today, and even if you were to do like BetterHelp, there are a host of different sites you could go to find a therapist and narrow it down to exactly what you're looking for, whether it's a certain gender that you would like to work with. Some people do not like working with men or don't feel comfortable working with men. Okay, you can specify that. Maybe you feel more comfortable working with someone who is faith-based or faith-oriented and can incorporate that in therapy, or incorporate your religious values in therapy. Sure, you can narrow that down. Be able to be a part of your own healing. And part of that is being able to make the steps to research things. If you can research how to do all this stuff on Instagram and create all these reaction videos, you can do the same thing with therapy. And I really encourage you guys to think about that. So that's where I'm going to leave it off today. I appreciate the questions that you guys sent in, and I welcome more. I would love to do another Q&A. That's all I have for you guys. The last thing I would leave with you is just to continue taking your healing journey one day at a time, and to continue giving yourself grace to heal through what you go through. And if nothing else, remember, faith helps.